Hi, and welcome to Global Headwinds, your weekly deep dive into geopolitics and the powerful forces shaping the world global economy. Today, we are picking up the thread from last week's discussion on Russia-Ukraine conflict and how it continues to reshape global events in ways rarely seen before. But first, let's talk about US President Donald Trump, a seasoned businessman and self-proclaimed master negotiator who made tariffs his weapon of choice when striking trade deals around the world. When Trump first took office, many in his own country's media were skeptical of his aggressive tariff policies.
The nuts and bolts are really clear. A new minimum tariff of 10%, reciprocal tariffs on the Chinese of 34%, the EU 20%, the Japanese 24%. These are very large numbers in trade terms, horrific numbers. But what this is really going to is the US changing the terms of trade, saying to the rest of the world, we're no longer doing business like we used to. And the rest of the world has now got a really big decision. Do we say we're going to fight back? Or do they say, let's start negotiating and finding a common ground? Consumers are going to pay more. Importers won't know what to charge. Factories will somehow not know what to do. This is one extraordinary mess that's going to take many weeks, months, if not years to sort out. And by and large, there's no guarantee this is going to be successful. Because everybody I've spoken to in the trade business says this is a vast experiment of unknown proportions where the consequences are simply unknown.
Yet, Trump's approach to international trade became a hallmark of his presidency, often catching even America's allies off guard. Take the US-European Union trade negotiations. Before the talks even began, Trump imposed a sweeping 30% tariff on all European goods entering the US. This strong-arm tactic left Europe with little leverage. Faced with the harsh take-it-or-leave-it deal, the EU eventually agreed to open several protected markets to US goods at zero customs duty. In return, Trump reduced the tariffs to an average of 15%. The deal, however, left the European players like France and Germany fuming, especially when the UK secured a softer deal, just a 10% tariff in exchange for opening its beef market to American producers at zero duty. This effectively sidelined European beef exporters, cutting off their access to the UK market entirely. And here's where it gets interesting. That beef deal directly benefited Trump's core voter base in America's red states, the heartland of the US beef production. Two birds killed with one stone. Trump didn't stop with Europe. He also used tariffs as leverage over smaller economically vulnerable nations, leaving them with little choice but to comply with the US demands. His strategies largely succeeded with Europe, Japan, and South Korea until he hit the resistance from two major players, China and India. With China, it began with sky-high tariffs of up to 145%, prompting Beijing to retaliate with 125% tariffs on US goods. Eventually, a truce was reached. The US lowered tariffs to 30% and China responded with a 10% tariff on American imports. That uneasy balance still holds. India, however, was a different story. Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Indian exports unless India opened its agricultural sector to the US products. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India refused, citing the livelihoods of millions of Indian farmers, 55% of the population, even though agriculture contributes just 18% to India's GDP. The negotiations still progressed, but suddenly they were hijacked by other global events. Trump shifted his attention to the Russia-Ukraine war, a conflict he famously claimed he could resolve within 24 hours of taking office. But as we noted in our last episode, President Vladimir Putin shows no signs of backing down. The world knows that Russia funds its war largely through oil sales, primarily to China, India, and Europe. Logically, cutting these purchases could squeeze Moscow's war chest. But instead of targeting all major importers, Trump singled out India, threatening an additional 25% tariff on Indian goods if New Delhi didn't cut Russian oil imports, while leaving China and Europe largely untouched.
And welcome back. President Trump's sweeping tariff hike on imports from India officially took effect today, with goods from the country now facing a 50% levy, one of the highest in the president's tariff toolkit. The rate was initially set at 25%, but was doubled to punish the country for purchasing Russian oil, as the White House tries to ramp up pressure on the Kremlin economically to reach a peace deal with Ukraine. Here's National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett earlier today.
And the bottom line is that we've had long trade negotiations with India. They haven't been particularly productive, and so it's still a work in progress to see where it's going to end up. But it's part of a program to put pressure on Russia to get a peace deal.
Well, the U.S. and India have yet to reach a bilateral trade deal despite holding 5 rounds of negotiations. And joining me now is NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Chung and NBC News correspondent Danielle Hamamdjian. Thank you both so much for joining me. Brian, I want to start with you. What effect can we expect that this tariff increase will have on the economy and the cost of goods?
Well, Gabe, certainly going up from 25% to 50% is going to mean more staggering price increases on the many things that we bring in from India. This is not necessarily one of our top 5 trading partners, but as one of the more significant, especially fast-growing economies in the world, there are a number of imports that we get from India that now could be subject to these tariffs. When you think about things like textiles, electronics, machinery, as well as gems and jewelry. But I do want to point out there are 2 things that are not on this list that are worth mentioning as well. These are major exports from India to the United States, and that's pharmaceutical products as well as smartphones. So many drugs are made in India at a generic level, and the iPhone in many cases is made in India and then shipped to the United States. Those will not be subject to the 50% tariffs, and I want to point out that is because not necessarily of negotiations with India, but because of separate industry-specific tariffs that the Commerce Department is weighing on both of those industries, meaning that tariffs could be coming later, but they are not part of the tariffs that are being applied today.
You know, Brian,
his administration even issued the bizarre statement, "The road to peace in Ukraine goes through New Delhi." This selective pressure on India raised eyebrows worldwide. Was it about geopolitics or something more personal? Trump has long coveted Nobel Peace Prize, portraying himself as a peacemaker. Could this punitive tariff strategy against India have been less about policy and more about polishing his own legacy? The result? A very strained Trump and Modi relations. Reports suggest Prime Minister Modi has even been avoiding direct calls from the US president. Yet to India's credit, it has not retaliated, despite massive 50% tariffs imposed by the US. Indian generic pharmaceutical companies continue to supply affordable medicine to the American public. And rather than escalate the tensions, Modi allowed Indian Hindustan Aeronautics Limited to continue negotiations with GE Aerospace on $1 billion deal for aircraft engines. He was surely putting national interest above personal disputes, something Trump perhaps could learn from. That's all for this week. Do join us next week for another interesting episode of Global Headwinds. And if you like this episode, press the like button and include a discerning comment.